Well, good afternoon, everyone. Great to see so many of my heroes and sheroes in the creativity and culture field. I'm so delighted. And I'm so envious because you all have been in this one meeting this entire day. And I, in some ways, regrettably, have been in 8 meetings thus far today. None, of course, as interesting, I'm certain, as the meeting going on in this room. It's really so, for me, exhilarating and inspiring and just joyful to look out into this room and see so many people who have trained and taught and tutored me over my many years on my journey. And I'm just grateful to be here, and I'm grateful to each and every one of you. Today, from what I understand, is really one of those days at the Ford Foundation. And there have been, in the history of this institution and this building since 1967, many seminal meetings of remarkable people. These meetings have generated, in many ways, because of the people who participated in those meetings and their sheer brilliance and determination, have contributed to transformations across American society and indeed across the world. And I truly feel like today is one of those days. I have to start by thanking my sister, that indefatigable, incandescent, and brilliant Teresita Fernandez. Where are you, Teresita? Give it up. Teresita, you know, I have to tell the story. So, I only knew of Teresita because, of course, she's Teresita. I mean, I knew of her. So I turn up at one of these panel discussions, and Kate, I believe you were there. I believe Kate Levin was there. Is she here? I thought Kate Levin was there, and she can testify that this is indeed true. It was one of those meetings, convenings at a big corporation where the arts was in New York was being discussed. There were 3 panels, and the theme of the conference was the vibrancy, robustness of the arts in New York City. Panel after panel went forward, and I was on the last panel. And sitting through the panels, I noticed something, and that is that there were no people of color on the panels, and that it was supposed to be about the vibrancy of the arts in New York City. And so I couldn't help myself on the last panel by saying, you know, does anybody notice anything strange about this conference besides me? And there she was. She stood up. She called everybody out. She turned the room inside out. She spoke truth to power. She named and shamed and told them in no uncertain terms that that meeting was not a legitimate meeting with a theme to be the vibrancy of the arts in New York City. Because without people of color, there is no arts in New York City. And so it was a remarkable moment. And after that meeting, when she scared everybody, and I think she was like used to, like, you know, I chased her down to the elevator. I was like, I've got to talk to you. And thus the love affair began. I also want to recognize my colleague, the inimitable Dr. Elizabeth Alexander, who heads the arts at the Ford Foundation, and along with Margaret Morton, makes it happen in the arts. So if you guys, it's all about them. They're amazing. I'm so grateful, so thankful. So Thelma Golden, you're in the house, and you know this started you and me talking about black people in the arts and saying, where are we? Where are we? And why do all those big institutions rely on you as their finder of all great talent, take all your staff and don't pay you, and then many of them don't want to share their donors with you. But we have wonderful, I saw Adam in the house because Adam is the exception. We love us some Adam because Adam keeps it real. And Adam shares his donors with you, and I know that's for real. So thank you. A lot of sharing. But there's more sharing that should be done, and that's why we got to talk about equity and keep that on the, okay. So back to those meetings. So in the 60s and 70s, we had meetings here. You know, there's something called area studies, and many of you may have been graduates of area studies. Many of you may be scholars in the area studies. And the Ford Foundation had a critical role in the 1960s in making a set of grants and establishing the first professorships in women's studies and African American studies and Afro history and Chicana studies. I mean, all of these things the Ford Foundation was so lucky to be a part of in the 1960s and 70s. And when I look back on the 80s, we started moving on women. And there was lots of work done in the 80s on women's rights, the Beijing Conference in the 90s, where Hillary Clinton made that great assertion that women's rights are human rights. That was a seminal time in India. Our office took up the issue of caste and the ways in which castes are structured in a country like India to ensure that some people are privileged and other people are underprivileged. And when I joined the Ford Foundation 6 or 7 years ago, we started more intensely looking at this question in the Western Hemisphere of the experience of people of African descent. Because one of the great privileges of being in an institution like Ford is that you have colleagues across the world, but you certainly have colleagues across the hemisphere. And so when we talk to our colleagues in Brazil, particularly in Brazil, but in Mexico, now in Bogota as well, there's something consistent. And that is that people of African descent have been historically marginalized. What a surprise. Because the experience of discrimination and exclusion and racial hierarchy is consistent across the entire hemisphere. And one of the great things that we get to do at Ford is to weave those narratives that recognize patterns of exclusion and patterns that have continued to persist to ensure that some people get justice and others get injustice. And so today is another one of those days, because as I was preparing to get ready for the meeting, I started reading up on Latinx. I started to come to understand the difference between Hispanics, Latinos, Latinx, the evolution that is happening in real time in the world, because there are people like you who, just as Skip Gates reminds me of the meeting where he came and said, Afro-American Studies is not a subsidiary of the history department. It's its own program. You are asserting that there is a discipline, there is a definition that you will define for the field and as a canon. And this is really one of those exciting moments. And I'm just so happy it's happening at the Ford Foundation. And I'm so happy to be able to, with Elizabeth and Margaret, support the efforts. Teresita, I think what you're doing is phenomenal, is just phenomenal. And one of the great thrills of being here is that I get to see you, and then I have Justice Sotomayor this afternoon, another fabulous Latinx coming in here. And I just am so grateful and so thankful to you for the opportunity, and want to do all that we can to support the work that you want to see done in the world, and that all of you want done in the world. I think it's really clear when we look across the landscape, the cultural landscape in this country, that we have a problem. Our institutions are not equipped and capacitated to fulfill their missions today because they don't and haven't but must embrace all that is America. And we are challenging institutions that were constructed and designed to serve other people who now must, in order to fulfill their missions, figure out how to serve us and people like us and people who look like us. And one of the real challenges that we're seeing playing out in our society today, which is partly why our politics are as toxic as they are, is that privileged institutions and privileged people are being challenged and are being held to account for delivering on their mission. So it is no longer acceptable for a museum to think that by busing in a few little black and brown kids, that they're actually fulfilling their educational mission under the state law that gave them the right to have a charter to run a museum. You are not fulfilling your mission. And it is not acceptable when we look across the boards, the staff, and the programming to not see a more representative, a more authentic, a more American group of people. And it is not an American group of people if it does not include people like you and me. And so our task and your task, many of you as artists especially, is to do what artists always do. And that is to hold the mirror up and make us look at ourselves and demand, interrogate us to deliver and fulfill the missions of the Ford Foundation, because we deserve interrogation too, and all of these great museums that we love and that we cherish. We have to help them fulfill their missions. And so today is just another great day at the Ford Foundation, and it's a great day because you all are here and you're committed to the journey, and the Ford Foundation will be on that journey with you. So thank you so much for the opportunity.